Thanks for the intro, and it's really great to be there. We're almost there. I really wanted to travel, but actually I have 4+1 reasons to stay home. So for now, I will just stick to robotics for the next couple of minutes. We have heard a lot of great talks and really great summaries. So I won't go into the details of how many things came together, what Kevin summarized really nicely, and I really don't want to go into really the financials that Andrew highlighted. I just want to put on the table a couple of our own results and put them in a context that how can we all work together when we have these results and kind of components, making sure that those are going to fit into a bigger picture and wrapping them around so that we eventually looking for productization and all in the frames of sustainability. My university, Ulbuda University, has now 6 technological areas in which we focus, and one of the primary ones are robotics, AI, and medical devices. So it's a very nice combination to see all those coming together. Just a fun fact, today is my last presentation as director of the University Research and Innovation Center. Since from Monday on, I take the directorship of the newly founded Initium Venture Labs, which is the technology transfer company for Ulbuda University. So I'm shifting a little bit towards innovation management, but I'm trying to keep my position as a research professor. So it's going to be a lot of exciting stuff because last year we established the region's first university venture capital fund owned by the university, and now looking into doing a lot of micro ventures in this context. So the Tony Bates Center for Intelligent Robotics is the only DVRK site in Central Europe, and we were kind of like, I think, the 17th established globally. So it's pretty cool that we have seen a lot of the early results on and happy to apply that. But in general, we try to identify ourselves more like system integrators. Working from lab robotics to respirator technology and sometimes slicing pigs or doing underwater robotics. So it's really a diverse landscape, and we try to use all technology, even all the way down to we started a couple of years ago developing our own spine surgical system. But I will not talk too much about these. But putting open source into context within the frames of the medical robotics domain, I think it has to be addressed that this is the least convenient and comfortable space for open source. So if you look into the origins of whole robotics in like robot-assisted minimally invasive surgery teleoperations type, it started at NASA during the Cold War. It continued under DARPA funding, military projects all along. So the fact is that it has been a long road. And those domains, like typically do not go hand in hand with open source. So we are supposed to talk more about it. How can make it happen? And probably most of you have seen these figures, even like the one with 40 years old now, that it shows that we have a good understanding that software is a key and safety is critical for medical devices. So I think if we put these together, we understand, like after many decades of medical and surgical robotics, how come we are still, just having a one-of-a-kind open source software workshop at Hamlin and not having a series of conferences related and so. I don't want to waste too much time on this. We have been covering this pretty well, and I think it has been fairly nicely addressed that one thing is the software, the other thing is the data that we can use and integrate, and the two go hand in hand. So if we don't have the good stuff, we won't have. One thing that has not been addressed particularly profoundly here in this workshop, but of course some posters and some other events did, that for good open source software, sometimes you need a good open source hardware. And from that aspect, I think it's outstanding that we have the DVRK, and that has been addressed profoundly, I think, so I don't need to go into any details. But just, it's I think it has to be praised. The effort went into it. It's amazing. And still, as of today, I think even though by today we have 8 clinical Da Vincis in Hungary, which is really great because we had 0 2 years ago, or 2.5. But still, if someone walks into our lab and says like, "Wow, you have a Da Vinci system," that's just wonderful. So I'm really grateful for all the support of Johns Hopkins, WPI, and all the other folks who Intuitive and the foundation who made it possible. And I think we have to see that it has branched so nicely. So open source software, hardware together. If you haven't come across this publication from, well, already a couple of years ago, first 10 years covered, I do recommend, because this is just eye-opening for us, even being involved for quite a while. Like, how many things can you achieve and walk into it, and then really technically addressing all aspects. And from here on, let's try to focus a little bit on what we have been doing so far, because my primary interest has been into automation of surgical subtask, of course, like not the high level, but you can find within the IROPSAF GitHub account a couple of useful, hopefully useful tools that could be used by other groups and hopefully have been used already by other groups. One example is that one we created for surgical subtask decomposition and subtask level automation. This is more like motion libraries. So we have been trying to automate at the level of Surgeme. So if you're familiar with this language of surgery kind of approach that Hopkins started probably 20 years ago, well, quite some time, then it might be good. Another very popular aspect that we started to contribute is visual servoing. So really understanding marker or markerless. How can we optimize camera motion with basic characteristics? And so this has been fairly nicely documented, published, and also just like maintained within the repository. I also have to admit that I think this has already been covered, that unless you are transforming it into some kind of business, it's extremely hard and resource consuming to maintain such repositories. So if you have a talented student that creates something and shares it, 5 years later, it's really hard to keep it running. A more recent area in which we started to delve into, it's the in-clinical or kind of closer to clinical skill assessment. So establishing some active relations with Semmelweis University, we have been using their XI capabilities and time non-invasive means for so far. So just, adding straps and a lot of cameras around the surgeons and trying to map really the skills that you can measure very accurately to some extent in the Da Vinci simulator to those practicing skills that you are doing with the real one, especially with the C-Spike Phantom board. This has been translating nicely into some indications again and correlating pretty well. More of the topics that we have already seen around here is really about the most classical surgical tool segmentations. Still, the Jigsaws database, I think we are all very grateful for that. But also, whenever you touch it, you start to understand the limitations of it. So I would really be happy to contribute even the community with some resources we have to create a larger, more diverse data set, which would allow us again to elevate the quality of outcome measures, because the Jigsaws has quite some limitations by now. And again, like we try to make reference studies. So whenever we create some complicated phantoms and stuff, we also try to make those open or reproducible at least, because that hopefully supports open approach towards hardware as well, or phantoms hopefully stimulates open software as well. And this is just one of my favorite projects ever, that we use the DVRK, just showing the versatility of the whole open architecture, and transformed our DVRK into a car simulator where we were able to observe the situation awareness of self-driving cars when there is a handover situation, kind of like adverse event, and translate those and try to measure physiological parameters of drivers and match that against coming from other simulators. So I think it's just like really fun and really useful. But to really get to the point, and yeah, for the interest of time, let's spend more time on the second part of the talk, which shows about like how do we bring closer open source to the people and application. And I think here sustainability comes into the picture. In the past couple of years, I was happy to spend some time with sustainability and trying to understand what it means for robotics. And in the levels, or at the levels where this connects very well with open source, in my experience and understanding, is that we really want to make things worth developing. So if you want to save resources, if you want to advance faster, if you do not want to replicate research, this is expected that you take into consideration the state of the art. You really build on the top of existing infrastructures, including software. And for example, in the EU, this has been a very critical aspect. Any new grants or proposals, you have to now comment and really put your research against existing solutions and match it on the scale of open source and open science approaches existent. So what we try to do really is make that happen. Last year we had a Hamlin workshop starting in this domain. So if you have some key interest, we will try to look into it. Of course, it goes way beyond just software and stuff. But what's interesting from this aspect that if you move more towards like productization, product assessment, I will talk a little bit about that in details, then there are some requirements. So from 2026 in the EU, it will be obligatory for companies when they are releasing new product to do a self-assessment with respect to the ESG parameters. So even if you are trying to integrate open source codes and components, you will have to make sure that you can somehow integrate it into your ESG policy and make sure that that supports your overall productization. If you want to learn more about this, last year with a couple of folks that we established the Sustainable Robotics Initiative, we published a pretty thorough paper, so it's extensive, and trying to analyze the different domains. And just to show you the outcome for surgical medical domain, based on the research methodology, we found that 52% of the sustainability development goals could be enabled and enhanced by robotic technology in the near future, and only there are a few that's gonna be like acting as inhibitors. So I think it's a good sell, and combining this with the open source initiative, your next proposal could use this as reference and say like, hey, I'm doing something for the global good and benefit. Unfortunately enough, there's very little evidence how robotic systems, prototypes, and especially hardwares are matched against this. So if you recall, like the Raven, which is a complete open architecture for medical and surgical robotics domains, Professor Hannaford and the colleagues have been trying to do that, kind of like providing an understanding how these technologies, components for different systems are linked together, because what eventually it leads to, and what we have to observe, that our product aimed for the market has to comply with FDA regulation and has to be able to achieve CE marking in Europe. And I have now like 15 years history in standardization, have been involved as a national delegate in the first surgical robotics standards from ISO and IEC side, and also from IEEE and the EU in Europe through the EU Robotics AISBL. So a couple of outcomes from that, which I think are able to serve and bring together us with open source and open science initiatives. One thing is that what authorities now require, and this is even though some of the newer standards, they might not even be recognized yet, but when you bring your new technology, providing a lot of components as well, they're going to look for two major components. Okay, where are the safety features, and how can you prove clinical efficacy? That's in Europe most critical. And throughout all the analysis that we have provided, one key element that arose was autonomy. So if you use any software or other components to provide autonomy to your system, which usually that's why we have software and software technology, that's going to be very thoroughly investigated, especially according to the new European law. And you have to be well prepared to present thorough testing and all other possibilities. And for that, I'm happy to report that we have at least some good practices. So IEEE has invested a lot of energy to provide you some recommendations in a standards 4, that's the 7000 series, which is about like ethically aligned design. And especially in the age of software and AI-driven technologies, it really offers you some systematic development practices. How can you ensure that your overall system, even if you have off-the-shelf components, you have a lot of OS components, eventually it still constitutes to the three main requirements that we have put against this system: the transparency, accountability, and trustworthiness. And particularly for robotic systems and autonomous systems, there is the IEEE 7007, which is an ontology base. So if you are familiar with ontologies and happy to apply those again for system development methods, this can be used quite nicely. An interesting fact, 3 years ago, a couple of actually, I think it came from Asia, Asian folks recommended to establish the new working group under the IEC-ISO joint working group responsible for medical robotics, exploring a new standard for modularity for surgical robots. I think as of today, I think it has been suspended without concluding in a new standard or so. But this just shows us that along the existing concepts, and so there's a lot of exciting new possibilities for modularity. If we start introduce on a standardized level modularity, even in medical robotics, that could really fast track the application of open source software and hardware. And as I mentioned, we just cannot get around the fact that as of last or this May, actually, after so many years of postponing and everything, the medical device regulation hit in Europe. So if you have a medical device, a software is already a medical device, so any form in the EU, you would like to integrate it in your medical device and product to acquire CE marking. That has to go through a very thorough verification, validation, and beyond. So what has been missing before, and now it's a requirement that you have to provide evidence-based investigations, and you have to provide, as I mentioned, that it's safe and transparent from the decision-making point of view, and also you have to prove somehow clinical benefit. It can come through clinical studies on your own or a market survey or systematic literature review. And this has changed the landscape quite a bit, because as soon as you have open source software, the extensive amount of testing will multiply very quickly. This comes hand in hand with the AI Act, because that creates a whole lot more trouble. And when preparing for the AI Act, the EU's AI Act, the MDR has now the very strict requirements regarding the documentation of your AI component. So even your complete training data has to be saved for audit purposes in the future. So you have to be able to restore and prove in any future point in time that particular system that you sold to that particular customer, what software version, under what training data, and what parameter set ran. So if you want to use some open source software components that you are not 100% familiar with, and you used only to test them from the outcome point of view, it's not going to be enough in the future. In one of our more recent research projects, we started to look into how to use different health economics and other related assessment technologies to bring closer these kind of complicated digital medical devices to assessment point of view, both from commercial and clinical value point of view. And actually, it's a pretty tricky domain. And what we have found, and we have been collecting data on it's now over 300 surgical robotic projects, mostly open source from open sources like Google searches and publications and press releases, and trying to really establish the key points like when the project was started, key landmarks. And unfortunately, we do not have trusted source of information whether they have employed any open source components, but that could come next. But what's interesting from that point of view, we have been interested whether the acquisition of a certification for medical robots and surgical robots particularly depends either on the amount of money invested into the project, or is there a correlation with respect to the region it was initiated, the whole project, or actually the year when the whole project started. So whether it was started 20 years ago or just now. And interestingly for us, at least, it came out that none of these really had a statistical significance. So it means that we are all 20 years ago or now, we have almost equal chances in the US or here to bring something to the market. At least that's what past data shows. But do not underestimate the complexity of that. So just the average times that we acquired with respect to months spent until your first clearance acquired, and the total amount invested in US dollars until it got. So unless you have, at least 100 or 200 million US dollars and probably 10 years to waste, then don't trust that your project will get close enough to get certification. And I think with open source, we have the potential in the future, even against these new stricter requirements that I was mentioning, to bring these projects or these numbers down. And the price is that if you have a new system, it does something good, it has a clinical value, it has a clinical use base, then the M&A transaction values that we have seen in the market have been staggering, at least in a few cases. So one thing we have seen, and again, we have addressed this nicely today in the workshop, that surgical robotics are very complex and complicated. Personally, I got to believe that the next step through which open source software and probably hardware can get into the operating room more smoothly is more like the augmented reality technology or XR technologies. So we have been investigating a lot more research energy into that topic, and hopefully by next Hamlin, I will be able to show you some of our new prototypes. But eventually, I will keep working on, bringing an open world of robotics and people come happily together and being able to share, because I think that's what brings us all closer to robots. So with that, I would like to thank you all for your attention, and just a kind of self-advisement. If you want to publish with us, yeah, we have a special issue running in Census on the topic, and also I've been running medical robotics blog for 15 plus years, or no, I don't dare to say it anymore. But yeah, many thanks for everyone contributed to our work. Thank you.